All right, today we're going to work on reviewing sections 3.6 through 3.8, and this is basically how we solve quadratics and polynomials. So the first way to solve is by solving straight out. So this is when you have two terms and your b term is missing, so your bx is not there. The second way is factoring. This is typically when your discriminant is a perfect square. Now this does not mean I can't try to factor something out first, but solving by factoring, that trinomial would need to be a perfect square. The quadratic formula always works, but remember, in order to use the first three, they have to be quadratic to begin with. Number 4 is grouping. Typically, this is done with 4 terms, and you're leading off with an x cubed. You take out of the first 2 and then the second 2. And then if none of that works, then I've got to go to rational roots. So that's p over q's, and I'm finding those rational roots and plugging them back in to see what gives me 0. So what I'm going to do is zoom in on problems 1, 2, and 3 and do 3 separate problems at a time. And we've got these 12 to solve. Let me zoom in to these first 3 problems, and we'll work these and then keep moving on. All right, so here's my first 3 problems. I'm going to start off with this first one, which is 4x squared minus 6x plus 1. Now this is already quadratic and it's 3 terms, so you either got to factor or use the quadratic formula. So what I'm going to do is get my calculator out, and I'm going to check to see what the discriminant is. So that's b squared minus 4ac. So b squared minus 4 times a times c. So that's negative 6 squared minus 4 times 4 times 1. And this right here gives me out 20. Since 20 is not a perfect square, I have to go with the quadratic formula. So remember, the quadratic formula is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, which is what I just did, all divided by 2r. So here we go. Here's b. So negative b is positive 6 plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, which I got out to be 20, all over 2 times a. 2 times 4 gives me 8. Now, next thing I have to do is to break down 20. Well, 20 is 4 times 5. 4 is my perfect square, so that's 2 on the square root of 5. So this is 6 plus or minus 2 on the square root of 5 all over 8. Now, last thing I have to check for is, can I simplify this thing? So is there a number that goes into 6, 2, and 8? And yes, 2 goes into all this. I'm going to take a 2 out. So 6 divided by 2 gives me 3. 2 divided by 2 gives me 1, so that's just the square root of 5. And then 8 divided by 2 gives me 4. So this was quadratic. I needed 2 solutions, and I got 2 solutions, 1 plus, 1 minus. So there's my 2 solutions on number 1. All right, then we move on to number 2. Number 2 is negative 2x squared plus 8x equals 3. So first thing I got to do here is get this thing in standard form. So this 3's got to move over right here. To move this 3 over, I need to subtract 3. So this is negative 2x squared plus 8x minus 8 equals 0. And the next thing I look to do is, can I take something out by factoring? Yeah, I could take a negative 2 out, or I can go with the quadratic formula here. So factoring or quadratic formula would get you your solution right here. All right, but let's check our discriminant just to give you a heads up here. All right, so discriminant is b squared. So that's 8 squared minus 4 times a is negative 2 in this problem. And then c, remember I had to move that over, is negative 8. And that gives me out 0. Well, is 0 a perfect square? Sure is, because the square root of 0 is 0. Now at this point, I can go to the quadratic formula, since I know b squared minus 4ac, or I can take this problem and factor it. So let's do the quadratic formula first, and then we'll talk about how to factor. All right, so the quadratic formula is negative b, so that's negative 8 plus or minus the square root of 0, what I just got right there, and all divided by 2 times a. Now be careful here. 2 times a. 2 times negative 2 is negative 4. Now the square root of 0 is just 0, so if I add or subtract 0, it's not going to do anything to my problem. So my problem here is just negative 8 divided by negative 4, which gives me out a positive 2 as my solution. Now, remember we talked about we got to have that many solutions. Well, if I have a squared, I need 2 solutions, but I only have 1 solution. So I got to figure out, what is my other solution? Well, if I add 0, I still get out this. If I subtract 0, I still get out this. So basically 2 comes out 2 times. So really we say this is 2 with a multiplicity of 2, and I've accounted for everything. All right, so that's how you do that problem by quadratic formula. Now let's look at it by factoring a little quickly here. All right, to factor, the first thing I would do is say, can I take anything out? Yep, 2. Now I'm going to take a negative 2 out since it leads off with it. So if I take a negative 2 out, I'm left with x squared minus 4x, and then plus 4 equals 0. And then I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to give me 4 and add to give me negative 4. Well, that's negative 2 and negative 2. So this is negative 2 times x minus 2 times x minus 2, factoring. And then from here, I just set each component equal to 0. Can't set negative 2 equal to 0 because there's not an x with it. So I would take x minus 2 and set that equal to 0. Then I would take x minus 2 here and set that equal to 0. Well, it's really the same thing. So I add 2, so here this gives me x equals 2. And there you can see that multiplicity coming out. I got 2 twice. So that's number 2. All right, moving along. Let's go to number 3. Number 3, to solve this problem, I look and I say, I don't have but 2 terms over here. And if I move this to the other side, it's going to be added to that 112 because those are like terms. So this problem right here is straight out. I'm missing my b term. I have no x's in the problem. Now I got x squared, but not x to the first power. So I'm going to solve this thing straight out. To solve this straight out, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take 112 to the other side. So I'm subtracting 112 over here. So 87 minus 112 gives me out negative 25. So I've got 3x squared equals negative 25. Now to solve this problem, I got to get rid of my coefficient that comes in front. So dividing by 3 gives me x squared equals negative 25 over 3. And I can't simplify that. So I just leave it just like that. All right, next thing I do is get rid of the square. To get rid of the square, I'm going to take the square root. When I take the square root, I need 2 solutions. And remember, squared, got to have 2 answers right here. So this is x equals 2 solutions are plus and minus. Now the square root, let me write this up here. This is the square root of negative 25 over the square root of 3. Well, 25 is a perfect square, but this is negative. Anytime we have a negative, that becomes imaginary. So the square root of 25 is 5, so we got to put 5i on the top, and in the bottom, we just leave it as the square root of 3. So my solution here is plus or minus 5i over the square root of 3. And I got 2 solutions. I needed 2 solutions, and there's my 2 solutions. One's positive, one's negative. Now, when I get to number 4 has 4 terms, so I automatically say, maybe grouping works. If grouping works, I go with it. If grouping does not work, then I got to go with P over Q's. All right, so looking at number 4. When I group, I always look at the first 2, and then I look at the second 2. So looking at the first 2 terms, I've got to figure out what can I take out of 2x cubed minus 3x squared. And here I can take out a x squared. So when I take an x squared out, I've got 2x minus 3. Now, if grouping truly works, when I take something out of this side, I better have a 2x minus 3 in common over there. All right, so looking at my next 2 terms, I'm thinking, what can I take out of negative 10 and positive 15? I can take a negative 5 out. Now, the reason I take negative out is because it leads off with a negative. Don't forget that negative sign. And I take a 5 out of both of these 2 things. All right, so when I divide, 10 divided by negative 5 gives me 2x. And then 15 divided by 5 gives me negative 3. And I can say, yes, grouping does work because I see these 2 things that are in common. So I'm going to factor. So I pull that out in front, my GCF, and I'm left with x squared minus 5. Now I've got this thing in factored form. So now all I'm going to do is take each part of this and set it equal to 0. So 2x minus 3 is set equal to 0. And then x squared minus 5 is set equal to 0. All right, so to solve this, I'm going to add 3. So 2x equals 3. And then divide by 2. So 3 over 2 is one solution. To solve this one, I'm going to add 5. So x squared equals 5. And then I'm going to take the square root. Now, square root, x squared, I need 2 solutions. So plus or minus the square root of 5. Now, going back to my original problem, highest power was 3. And I've got 1, 2, 3 solutions. So my solutions here are 3 over 2 and plus or minus the square root of 5. Always check to make sure you have that number of solutions that you need within the problem. All right, so next problem I'm going to is number 5. Number 5, I see 3 terms. Since I see 3 terms, I can solve this by factoring or the quadratic formula. But I'm thinking, I can't do factoring or quadratic formula first, maybe because I got this cube right here. So let's see if we can factor something out before we take this to the quadratic formula, or factoring again if we need to. All right, so I look first and I say, ooh, it leads off with a negative, so I got to take a negative sign out. And all these are even numbers, so I can take a 2 out. And I'm thinking, what variable of x can I take out? Just x to the first. So I'm going to take out a negative 2x. When I take out a negative 2x, I'm left with 6x squared. Be careful right here. Plus x. And then right here, I'm left with minus 2 equals 0. Now, this one's going to give me 1 solution. This one's going to give me 2 solutions for a total of 3 solutions. So I look here and I say I got quadratic. So I can factor, or from that point forward, go to the quadratic formula. So to decide if I want to do there, I can check my discriminant. So checking my discriminant, I kind of covered it up, but I've got b squared. Remember, b was 1, so 1 squared minus 4 times a was 6. I'm just checking what's on the inside, and my c was negative 2, and that gives me out 49. Well, 49 is a perfect square, which means this thing could be factored if I chose to factor this problem, okay? Most of y'all are probably going to use the quadratic formula, so that's what I'm going to go with first. All right, so first thing, don't forget this. So negative 2x gets set equal to 0, so I divide by negative 2 and x equals 0. To solve this quadratic, we can go with the quadratic formula. So here we go. Negative b, opposite here. Negative 1 plus or minus the square root of what I just got, 49, all over 2 times 8. 2 times 6 gives me 12. All right, square root of 49 is 7, so this is negative 1 plus or minus 7 all over 12. Now, right here, we got to get out distinct solutions since we had a perfect square. So I'm going to take negative 1 and subtract 7. Negative 1 minus 7 is 8. And then I'm going to take 8 and divide that by 12, and that gives me out 2/3. So 2/3 is one solution. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take negative 1 and add 7. Negative 1 plus 7 gives me 6, and I take 6 and divide that by 12. 6 divided by 12 reduces into 1/2. So there's 1, 2, 3 solutions. So my solution on this problem is 0, 2/3, and positive 1/2. Now you could put them in order if you wanted to, or you can just list them out. Now, what else could I do? I could also go to this problem right here, just the inside, and I could factor it if you saw that. Okay, so I'm thinking, what multiplies to give me 6? Or you could do the bubble method right here. So either one's fine. If you did the bubble method, let's do that since what most of y'all is going to do. You would write 6x down twice. Then I would take 6 and negative 2 and multiply those two things together. Now, 6 times negative 2 gives me negative 12. So I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to give me negative 12 and add to give me 1. That's 4 and 3. Since I want a positive 1, my 4 needs to be positive and my 3 needs to be negative. Now I'll go from here and see if I can take anything out. Out of these two, I can take a 2 out. So this is going to leave me with 3x plus 2. And out of this one, I can take a 3 out. So that's going to leave me with 2x minus 1. So from there, you should get the same solutions out to solve your problem. Okay? All right, let's go to number 6 right here. Solving number 6. Oh, y'all, my bad. Go back right here. This was negative 1 minus 7. Negative 1 minus 7 is negative 8. Negative 8 divided by 12 is negative 2/3. So this should be negative 2/3. And I saw my answer right here when I was going to solve this right here. 3x plus 2, when I solve that, I get out negative 2/3. So negative 2/3 should be that solution. So be careful. All right, then we go to number 6 right here on this page. On number 6, I've got 8x squared minus 3x plus 2 equals 3x minus 1. Highest power is x squared, so I know I'm still dealing with a quadratic in order to solve this problem. So from here, I'm going to push everything to one side, and then from there, see what I can do. So moving this 3x over, I'm going to subtract 3x. It's going to go in the middle right here, like terms, and I'm going to add 1. It's going to go on the very end. So I've got 8x squared minus 6x plus 3 equals 0. All right, from here, I check the discriminant. So checking my discriminant, see my calculator here, is going to give me b squared, so that's negative 6 squared, minus 4 times a is 8, and c is 3. So that gives me out negative 60. Now, negative 60 is not a perfect square, so I have to use the quadratic formula in order to solve this one. So solving this, I've got negative b. So this will be 6 plus or minus what I just got out, square root of negative 60, all over 2 times 8. 2 times 8 would give me 16. Now I got to break down negative 60. Now first thing, negative. Negative is going to cause my I to come out in front, and then I can break down 60. Now 60 is 4 times 15, so I could take 60 and divide by 4, and I get out that 15. 4 is my perfect square, so this is 2 on the square root of 15, but don't forget I need that I. So this is 6 plus or minus 2i on the square root of 15 all over 16. And then I'll look at all the numbers outside. 6, 2, and 16. What can go into 6, 2, and 16? They're all even, so 2 can go into it. So I divided. So 6 divided by 2 gives me 3. Plus or minus 2i divided by 2 is just I on the square root of 15 over 16 divided by 2 gives me 8. I needed 2 solutions, and I've got out 2 solutions. So there's problems 1 through 6.